The afternoon light filtered through the windows of a small home in Sacramento, California, when 9-year-old Thomas Morrison looked up from his history textbook and spoke words that would stop his mother's heart. "I remember giving that speech," he said quietly, his finger resting on a photograph of Robert F. Kennedy at the Ambassador Hotel. "I remember the lights, the people pressing forward, and I remember the sound." He stopped abruptly, his face pale. "I never got to finish what I wanted to say." His mother, Rebecca Morrison, felt the room tilt slightly. Thomas had been studying American history for a school project, but nothing in the textbook contained details about Kennedy's final speech. Nothing about the lights or the crowd or the unfinished words. She sat down beside her son, her hands suddenly cold. "What do you mean, Thomas?" she asked, keeping her voice carefully steady. "What speech are you talking about?" Thomas looked at her with eyes that seemed older than 9 years should hold. "The speech I was giving when it happened. When everything stopped. June 5th. I know the date. I've always known the date, but I didn't understand why until now." Rebecca Morrison had raised Thomas alone since his father died when Thomas was 2. She prided herself on being rational, grounded, skeptical of anything that couldn't be explained. But over the next several weeks, as Thomas began sharing memories that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his own experience, she found herself documenting details that defied easy explanation. She started a journal, recording everything Thomas said without prompting, noting the dates and contexts. She contacted Dr. James Whitfield at the California Institute for Consciousness Research, a clinical psychologist who had spent 15 years investigating cases of apparent past life memory in children. Dr. Whitfield agreed to meet with Thomas in a neutral setting, his office in Berkeley, a comfortable space with soft lighting and shelves lined with both academic texts and children's books. He explained his methodology to Rebecca before the first session. "I don't come into these cases trying to prove or disprove anything," he said. "I'm looking for patterns, for specificity, for details that can be verified or contradicted. I mix in false information with true information. I observe not just what children say, but how they say it, their emotional responses, their physical reactions to specific images or questions." During their first meeting, Thomas sat in a chair that seemed too large for him, his feet not quite touching the floor. Dr. Whitfield began with gentle, open-ended questions. "Thomas, your mother tells me you've been having some memories that feel very real to you. Can you tell me about them?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his hands folded in his lap. When he spoke, his voice was different, more measured, more careful with words than most 9-year-olds. "It's not like remembering something that happened yesterday," he said. "It's more like, have you ever had a dream that felt more real than being awake? But this isn't a dream. It's like there's another person's life in my head alongside my own." He described waking up on his 9th birthday with a profound sense of sadness he couldn't explain. "I felt like I'd lost something important, like there was work I hadn't finished. And then over the next few weeks, I started seeing things in my mind. A hotel kitchen, people reaching for me, someone I cared about very much standing nearby." Dr. Whitfield made notes, his expression neutral. "Can you describe this person you cared about?" Thomas closed his eyes. "She had dark hair. She was wearing something pale-colored, maybe white or cream. She was pregnant. I was worried about her, about whether she'd be okay after." He opened his eyes abruptly. "I don't want to talk about what happened next." Over the following sessions, Dr. Whitfield carefully constructed a timeline of Thomas's memories. He showed Thomas photographs of various hotels from the 1960s, mixing images of the Ambassador Hotel with similar properties. Thomas identified the Ambassador immediately. That's where it happened. But not the ballroom, the kitchen. There was a shortcut through the kitchen. Historical records confirmed that Kennedy had indeed taken a route through the hotel kitchen that night, a detail not commonly featured in textbooks or documentaries aimed at children. Dr. Whitfield then showed Thomas photographs of multiple women, mixing images of Ethel Kennedy with other women from the same era. Thomas studied each photograph carefully, then pointed to one. "That's her, but she looks different here, younger than I remember her. In my memories, she looks tired. She'd been through so much already." The photograph Thomas identified was indeed Ethel Kennedy, taken in 1968, her 11th child due within months. The detail about her exhaustion aligned with biographical accounts from that period, accounts that appeared in academic texts, not children's history books. The specificity continued to accumulate. Thomas described the feeling of the podium under his hands, the particular quality of the lights. They were hot. You could feel them on your face. He mentioned a speech impediment he'd worked to overcome in childhood, a detail verified in Kennedy's early biographies but rarely discussed in general historical accounts. He described a profound love for the ocean, for sailing, for the feeling of salt spray and wind. Rebecca confirmed that Thomas had always been drawn to water despite growing up far from the coast, despite never having been on a boat. Dr. Whitfield conducted what he called knowledge testing, asking Thomas specific questions about the late 1960s that would be difficult for a child to know without deep research. What was happening in California politics in the spring of 1968? Thomas spoke without hesitation. The primary. That's why I was at the hotel. We'd won. People were so happy. They thought we could actually change things, stop the war, help people who were struggling. I wanted to believe we could. The detail was accurate. Kennedy had won the California Democratic primary that night. But Dr. Whitfield pressed further, introducing false information to test Thomas's responses. And you gave your victory speech in the main ballroom, correct? Thomas shook his head. No, the embassy room. The ballroom was too small for everyone who showed up. Records confirmed this was accurate. Kennedy had spoken in the embassy ballroom, not the hotel's smaller ballroom. When Dr. Whitfield deliberately misidentified other people in Kennedy's life, Thomas consistently corrected him, providing accurate names and relationships. The emotional component of Thomas's memories proved equally striking. He spoke with profound sadness about siblings. There were so many of us. I was the seventh. I worried about the younger ones, whether they'd be okay. Robert Kennedy had indeed been the seventh of 9 children. Thomas described a complicated relationship with his father. He wanted us to be tough, to never show weakness. But I felt everything so deeply. I could not feel things. This aligned with historical accounts of Joseph Kennedy Sr.'s demanding parenting style and Robert Kennedy's reputation for emotional intensity. One afternoon, without prompting, Thomas began describing a specific memory that brought tears to his eyes. There was a day when my brother didn't come home. I was at home when I heard. I remember falling to my knees in front of the television. I couldn't believe it. He was supposed to be the one who changed everything. Rebecca, watching through a one-way mirror with Dr. Whitfield, felt her throat tighten. Robert Kennedy had been at his home in McLean, Virginia, when he learned of his brother's assassination in November 1963. Account from that day described his devastating grief, his physical collapse upon hearing the news. Dr. Whitfield brought in historical photographs from that period, images of Robert Kennedy in the months following his brother's death. Thomas studied them with an expression that seemed too knowing for a child. I remember feeling like I was drowning, like I had to become him, carry on what he started. But I wasn't him. I couldn't be him. The psychological toll of John F. Kennedy's assassination on his younger brother was well documented, but the specific feeling Thomas described of being inadequate to fill an impossible void matched private correspondence and interviews with family friends from that period. As the investigation continued, Dr. Whitfield consulted with historians specializing in the Kennedy family. He shared Thomas's unprompted statements, details about family dynamics, personal habits, private fears. Dr. Margaret Chun, a historian at Georgetown University who had spent 30 years studying the Kennedy family, reviewed the transcripts. Some of this is remarkable, she told Dr. Whitfield during a video call. The detail about Kennedy's childhood speech impediment, for example, that's not common knowledge. And the specific description of his relationship with his father, the emotional complexity Thomas describes, that aligns with private letters and interviews with close family friends that weren't published until years after Kennedy's death. But Dr. Chun urged caution. Children are remarkable absorbers of information. They pick up details from overheard conversations, from television programs, from fragments of things they don't consciously remember encountering. Thomas could have been exposed to documentary footage, historical programs, conversations between adults. Dr. Whitfield acknowledged this possibility, which is why we're being methodical. I'm tracking not just what Thomas knows, but how he knows it, the emotional quality of his memories, the way certain details emerge naturally versus others that require prompting. Rebecca Morrison struggled with her own skepticism and hope. She searched their home for any books, videos, or materials about Robert Kennedy that Thomas might have encountered. She found nothing. She contacted Thomas's school, asking about curriculum content, class discussions, any projects involving 1960s history. Thomas's fourth-grade class hadn't yet covered that period. She interviewed family members, friends, anyone who might have discussed the Kennedys around Thomas. No one recalled such conversations. One evening, Rebecca sat with Thomas in his room, the two of them looking through the journal she'd been keeping. "Thomas," she said gently, "do you understand how unusual this is? The things you're remembering?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I know it sounds crazy. Sometimes I think maybe I am crazy. But it doesn't feel made up. It feels like remembering something that really happened to me. Not to someone else. To me." He was quiet for a moment. "The hardest part is remembering the kids. My kids. I had 11 children, and I knew I might not see them grow up. I knew what I was doing was dangerous. People warned me, but I felt like I had to keep going." Robert Kennedy had indeed had 11 children, with his wife pregnant with their youngest when he died. The knowledge that his campaign work put him at risk was documented in conversations with friends and family. Thomas's expression of this conflict, the tension between duty and family, matched account from those close to Kennedy during his final months. Dr. Whitfield arranged for Thomas to meet with Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a child psychologist specializing in trauma and dissociative experiences. Dr. Hayes spent several sessions with Thomas, assessing his overall psychological health, looking for signs of fantasy proneness, suggestibility, or other factors that might explain his apparent memories. Her assessment was nuanced. Thomas demonstrates no signs of dissociative disorder or fantasy-prone personality, she reported to Dr. Whitfield. He's remarkably grounded. Actually, he distinguishes clearly between his current life and these other memories. He doesn't claim to be Robert Kennedy now. He says he's Thomas, but that he has memories of being someone else before. This distinction proved important. In documented cases of past life memory in children, this pattern appeared consistently. Children who maintained clear identity boundaries while reporting memories from what they described as previous lives. Thomas never pretended to be Robert Kennedy in his daily life. He played with friends, attended school, enjoyed video games and soccer. But certain triggers, dates, photographs, specific locations, would bring these other memories forward with striking emotional force. In one particularly remarkable session, Dr. Whitfield showed Thomas a photograph of a beach house. Thomas's reaction was immediate and visceral. "Hyannisport," he said quietly. "I can smell the ocean. I can hear all of us, brothers, sisters, cousins, running across the lawn. This is where we were supposed to be safe, where we could just be a family." His eyes filled with tears. "I miss them. I miss the sound of all those voices." Robert Kennedy's deep connection to the family compound at Hyannisport was well documented, as was his grief at how violence had shattered what should have been a sanctuary. Dr. Whitfield introduced one final test. He asked Thomas to draw a floor plan of the Ambassador Hotel kitchen from memory, specifically the path Kennedy would have taken that night. Thomas drew carefully, marking the position of ice machines, serving tables, the door through which he said he'd entered. Dr. Whitfield later compared this drawing to historical photographs and architectural plans. The layout matched with remarkable accuracy, including details about the positioning of equipment that wouldn't be obvious from standard historical accounts. Yet questions remained. Even Dr. Whitfield, who had investigated dozens of similar cases, couldn't definitively explain how Thomas possessed such specific knowledge. "We have several possibilities," he explained to Rebecca during their final consultation. 1. Thomas somehow, through means we don't fully understand, retained memories from a previous life as Robert Kennedy. 2. Thomas accessed information about Kennedy through some form of extrasensory perception or collective consciousness. 3. Thomas was exposed to extremely detailed information about Kennedy through conventional means that we haven't been able to identify. 4. This represents some combination of actual unusual memory and conventionally acquired information that Thomas has synthesized unconsciously. Rebecca asked the question that had kept her awake for months. What do you believe happened? Dr. Whitfield was quiet for a long moment. I believe Thomas is experiencing something real, genuine memories that feel completely authentic to him. Whether those memories represent actual past life recall or something else entirely, I can't say with certainty. But the specificity of his knowledge, the emotional authenticity, and the consistency of his accounts over time suggest this isn't simple fantasy or fabrication. Something unusual is happening here, something that challenges our conventional understanding of consciousness and memory. As Thomas approached his 10th birthday, the intensity of his memories began to fade, a pattern Dr. Whitfield had observed in other cases. It's as if there's a window in early childhood when these memories are most accessible, he explained. As children develop stronger identities in their current lives, previous memories tend to recede. Thomas confirmed this experience. It's not that I don't remember anymore, he said, but it feels more distant now, like watching something through a cloudy window instead of standing in the room. What remained was Thomas's deep sense of unfinished business. I think about the speech a lot, he told his mother one evening. The things I wanted to say about justice and peace and helping people who felt forgotten. I feel like that message, that work, it's still important. Maybe that's why I remember. Not to prove anything about past lives or reincarnation, but to remind people that the work isn't finished. The speech isn't finished, and maybe we all have a responsibility to finish it. Rebecca Morrison found herself changed by the experience. She'd begun as a skeptic, convinced there must be a rational explanation. She'd ended up uncertain, open to possibilities she'd never considered. I can't prove my son lived before as Robert Kennedy, she said, but I also can't prove he didn't. What I know is that these memories, whatever their source, have shaped Thomas into a remarkably compassionate child who cares deeply about justice and equality. If that's the legacy of this experience, whether it's memory or metaphor or something else entirely, then perhaps the question of how it happened is less important than what we do with it. Dr. Whitfield concluded his formal investigation with a detailed case report that presented the evidence without definitive conclusions. The Thomas Morrison case represents one of the most thoroughly documented examples of apparent past life memory I've encountered, he wrote. While multiple explanations remain possible, the specificity and emotional authenticity of Thomas's accounts warrant serious consideration by researchers investigating consciousness and memory. Whether these experiences represent genuine past life recall, some form of non-local consciousness, or phenomena we don't yet have frameworks to understand, they suggest that human consciousness may be far more complex than our current models acknowledge. The story of 9-year-old Thomas Morrison and his memories of being Robert F. Kennedy raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness, the persistence of memory, and the possibility that who we are extends beyond the boundaries of a single lifetime. Whether his experiences represent actual past life recall or something else entirely, they invite us to consider mysteries that science has yet to fully explain. The investigation continues, not just into Thomas's specific case, but into the larger questions his story illuminates. Questions about consciousness, memory, and the enduring nature of unfinished work. If you're fascinated by these explorations into consciousness and past life phenomena, subscribe to this channel for more carefully researched investigations into extraordinary claims that challenge our understanding of human memory and identity. We bring you documented cases, expert analysis, and stories that open doorways to profound questions about who we are and who we might have been.